All right, so you should be turning to page 204 if you have a book, or you should be going to HMH, and our story is called Quaking Earth, Racing Waves. Dun, 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 dun. So yesterday we just reviewed our three there was one new root and two suffixes: geo, earth; ology, study of; lologist, the one who does. And then we had those 7 new vocab words. I did not double check this morning to see who already turned theirs in and who didn't. I'll check that during STEM, and I will try to get them graded sometime today as well. You had 4 vocab sentences. Hopefully you guys finished those. We had destruction, triggered, thrust, radiate, parallel, lateral, and modified. So we're going to be finding those in our story. I like our story this week. It's an informational text, but I think it is a good informational text. Don't mind it. Informational text isn't necessarily my favorite type of text. I'm more of a realistic fiction person, but I do think this story is a good one, and I think you guys are going to enjoy it as well. So on page 204, whether in the book or online, that is the prepare to read page. And this is where we find out all about what an informational text is. First off, just based off the title, informational text, that already tells us why the author wrote this story. The 3 reasons authors write things are to entertain, persuade, or inform. If it is an informational text, we automatically know that the author wrote this to do what? Everyone?
Inform.
Inform, of course. The author's trying to teach us, inform us about something. So, Zoe, I'm going to use your charger since it's right here. These Google Meets really kill my battery. Thanks. Anyway, so informational text tells us about a topic, event, or a specific place. And as we read the story, I'm going to have you guys decide. Is it telling us about a topic? Is it telling us about an event or a place? Would someone like to read super nice and loud, like caw, caw, because Zuri has to listen, or Zuri has to be able to hear you at home? Would someone like to read our first bullet point? Gabby.
Informational texts may organize ideas under subheadings. They contain main ideas and supporting details, including facts, examples, and sometimes quotations.
Yeah, so we're going to see that in our story. There are headings and then there are subheadings, and they just separate what the subheading tells us exactly what that section or that paragraph is going to be about. We will have actual facts in the story. And can someone remind me what quotations are? It says there may sometimes be quotations. What does that mean, John?
Like someone's talking, or it's like something from a different text.
Yeah. So when we see quotations specifically in an informational text, it's going to be a quote that someone once said, and then it's in a quote, like someone actually said this. That quotation is showing me someone actually said this one time. All right. And we'll talk about main idea and supporting details throughout the story as well. Gabby, please call on someone to read the next bullet point. You have to be loud if you're going to read.
Informational text may contain science or social study words specific to the topic.
And can someone remember what that means? Science specific or math specific or social studies specific? What type of words are those? Blank words. Phoebe?
Content area words.
Yes, content area words. Thank you so much for remembering that. And there will be words in here specific to science and potentially social studies. And if you remember one of our vocab words, parallel, I would consider that to be a math-specific content area word because we hear the word parallel a lot in math when we're talking about parallel lines. So those content area words are specific to a content area, which is science, social studies, or math. all words are reading words, right? If we can read the word, it has to do with reading. That's why reading is not one of our content areas specific for that. Malik, you may call on someone else to read our next bullet point.
Visuals such as diagrams and mapping text features such as sidebars may tell more about the topic.
Yes, especially in informational text, they give us little diagrams or maps, or they draw us pictures to help explain more about things. That way we have a better picture of it in our mind. And there will also be some sidebars in here. So this story, they do a good job with photographs. They do a good job with maps and all of that. So I do think this is the author does a really good job with this informational text using all three of those bullet points that we just described. We'll see all of those within our story. So our title is Quaking Earth, Racing Waves. Dun, 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 dun. Quaking Earth. When I say the word quaking earth, what do you automatically think of? Eliana? Earthquake. Good job. When I hear quaking earth, I think earthquake, because quaking earth, earthquake. See how that works? So we can assume the story might be about earthquakes, right? Then it also says racing waves. When you hear racing waves, that one's not as obvious as earthquake. What might racing waves be about, Zoe?
Like waves racing?
Yes, fast waves. But what type of natural disaster? Because remember, that's what Module 3 is all about, natural disasters. What type of natural disaster might that be, Gabby? Tsunami. Flash floods. What's the other one that they get in Florida all the time? Hurricanes. All of those have to do with water. So we don't know specifically which one yet, but all of those are good guesses, good predictions of what this story might also be about. Do we have flash floods here where we live, or we can. It's not like they happen all the time. But do we have tsunamis?
No.
Do we have hurricanes? No. So those were things we're not necessarily familiar with, but we can have earthquakes in Indiana. They don't happen very often because we're not necessarily at a fault line, but could happen. All right? Any questions before we begin reading? Yeah. Yep. Gabby, can you do me a favor? And get that remote off my desk, because that thing is just buzzing, buzzing, buzzing. What?
Can I go use it when John comes back?
What?
Can I go use the bathroom when John gets back?
John's going to the closet, so just go to the bathroom now. All right, friends, we're getting started. All right.
I lost my straw.
You lost your straw?
Yeah.
Calvin, hold on. Didn't you have a straw? Where'd you find it? Zoe, Calvin has your straw.
It's so bright. Throw it. I'll catch it.
No, Calvin, don't throw it. Thank you, Calvin. All right, I need you on page 206. What do you say?
Throw it.
Well, yeah, obviously we'll have to clean it.
Warm.
All right. 206. Or yeah, what are we doing? Turn the page, friends. Everyone's just chilling.
Yeah.
206, first page. This is a longer story, so get ready to read with me. It says, in July 2004, the village school on Tello Island, Indonesia, had a visitor with a startling story to tell. All right, so we just found out our setting. Where is our setting? And setting is time and place. Isabel, what is the time?
July 2004.
Yes, July 2004. None of you were alive in 2004, right? Right. I didn't think so. I was alive in 2004. I was 8 in 2004. Fun fact. And place. Where is this taking place, Alex? Indonesia, specifically Tello Island. I'm assuming I spelled that right, but I don't know. Said that. I'm not spelling anything. So they have a visitor, and they're telling a story. Startling story to tell. What does startling mean? If I'm startled by something, what does that mean? Isaiah? Surprised by it. Like, oh, snap, startled. Like the other day when I was trying to shut my closet and all of a sudden Zoe appeared. Boop, startled. Everyone remember that? I do. It was terrible. All right.
I remember.
As the students in their red and white uniforms sat quietly listening, geologist Carrie, what am I going to call her? Carrie Sy explained that under the ocean, 60 miles from their island was a ticking time bomb. Okay, well, that does not sound good. So a geologist is what? Someone that does what? Studies what?
Studies
Earth, because geo means earth. An ologist, one who does study of. Okay, so a geologist, Carrie Sy, explained that under the ocean, 60 miles away from their island, was a ticking time bomb. Okay, so we have to think. Hi, Eric. We have to think. Is that an actual bomb, or is that a metaphor for something else under the water, right? Regardless, it's 60 miles away from them, which we're 60 miles from here. I don't know. Can't think of what? Your house is like 8 miles from here. Anyways, no, Illinois is only like 34 miles away or something. Anyway, 60 miles, like round trip to Chicago and back, probably. So that's not too far away. All right. For hundreds of years, the Sunda Mega Thrust Fault has been storing energy that would be released in a massive undersea earthquakes. Dun, 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 dun. So is it an actual bomb under the water? No. What is it? Alicia, what is actually under the water? I'm going to need more than that. Madeline? Okay, earthquakes aren't just chilling underneath the surface. It's something that would cause an earthquake. John?
The fault line. They're sitting on a fault line, and she's referring that to a time bomb.
Yes, remember, the fault line is the thing that can create an earthquake. An earthquake is not just sitting, waiting to erupt. It is the fault lines that can meet, then erupt. So that's what she's referring to as a ticking time bomb, because it's been sitting there for hundreds of years. It's storing the energy, and it would be released in a massive undersea earthquakes. The powerful quakes would likely cause tsunamis, fast-moving waves that could wipe out the entire village-side island. So, racing waves is referring to what natural disaster? Abby? Tsunami. So now we know which one racing waves was referring to. When we started, we did not know for sure. The students and their teachers were surprised by Sy's warning. They'd never felt giant earthquakes or seen tsunami waves. How did he know the earth was going to shake? Okay, so all these people that are in this village, they're sitting there listening. This geologist, that's his job to study earth, is telling them, like, you're close to a fault line. There could be earthquakes, there could be tsunamis. And they're like, okay, well, that's weird. We've never had that, So they're probably like, I just really like your mask, Bree. They just are just, they probably are confused, not totally sure. Sy explained for more than a decade, scientists from the California Institute of Technology had been studying a section of the fault just to the south. They'd figure out that major earthquakes shook the region about every 200 years. The last big quake was in the early 1800s, which meant another one could come at any time. Though Sy couldn't say exactly when it would happen, he was almost certain there would be at least one major earthquake in the student's lifetime. But no one could have known the next big quake would hit just a few months later. All right, so these scientists somehow, I don't know exactly how, were able to find out earthquakes happen every 200 years. And if one happened in the 1800s, now it's 2000, specifically 2004, they know, okay, an earthquake is going to happen eventually. Soon, they're not totally sure when, but soon. So he's trying to tell the students that sometime in their lifetime, there's going to be an earthquake. But it just gave us a little lead saying it would hit in the next few months. So that was the first section. And now we have this thing called rising corals. That would be a what? That title is a what?
Sidebar.
Not a sidebar. Subheading. Remember, sidebars off to the side. So, rising corals. Scientists know a lot about earthquakes after they happen, right? Because no one can say on March 4th there's going to be an earthquake. Can anyone say that? No, because it's unpredictable. It's a natural disaster. We do not know exactly when they're going to happen. So scientists are able to learn a lot just after the fact. But they can't predict what hour, day, year, or even decade an earthquake will hit, which is why earthquakes can be so dangerous because we don't know exactly when they're going to happen. Where a thing like a hurricane, using satellite, we can see when a hurricane is moving in to, hit something, right? We can see that happening on satellites. So those are, well, they're still super dangerous, but at least we're able to predict and prepare for those where an earthquake we cannot. So how did Carrie Sy know to warn the Tello Islanders that an earthquake might happen soon? He read the corals. Interesting. Anyone ever been to the ocean?
No.
Ever? Okay, well, yes or no? Yeah. So there's coral, and do corals just have words that say there's going to be an earthquake in soon? No, so we need to find out, what does he mean he read the corals? In the Indian Ocean, big corals called porpoises grow from the sea floor to the water's surface, then outward. Okay, so huge corals. They grow floor to the surface, and then they grow out, okay? So on the floor, grow up, then they grow out. The ocean floor sinks slowly between earthquakes, dragging the coral down, then rises quickly during a quake, rising the coral up again. Over hundreds of years, all this up and down causes the coral to grow outward in donut-shaped rings. Sy discovered that by looking at the growth patterns of the porpoise coral head near the fall, he could pinpoint the dates of the past earthquakes and maybe find a pattern that would help predict future quakes. So the ocean floor, in between earthquakes, is slowly sinking, and then when an earthquake happens, they rise up, and it changes how the coral is. So he's able to look at the coral and see, oh, this was the last earthquake, okay? So is he legitimately reading words on the coral? No, he's looking at pieces of the coral and is able to find a pattern. He's not actually reading it, but, Using underwater chainsaws, who knew that was a thing, Sy and other scientists sliced off slabs of coral heads that were hundreds of years old. Sure enough, they found that on the section of the fault just north of the Metawani Islands and just south of Tello, earthquakes occurred in pairs about every 200 years. Pair means what? How many? 2. Thank you. One pair of quakes hit in the 1300s, another in the 1500s, and a third in 1797 and 1833, almost 200 years ago. According to the corals, it was time for another big quake. So every 200 years, there is a pair of earthquakes. That means 2 earthquakes happen. So 2 earthquakes happened in the 1300s. 2 earthquakes happened in the 1500s. Then the last pair was in 1797 and 1883. So those are considered a pair of earthquakes, even though they are 36 years apart. That's crazy. 36 years apart, but they still happen so close within those 200 years that they are considered a pair of earthquakes. So now it's been 200 years just about. So if the same pattern continues, it would be time for another earthquake, or specifically pairs of earthquakes. And now this at the bottom is in a different color. So this, and it's a diagram, what would this be called? It is not written directly as our story. It is, I don't want to say it's off to the side. It's off to the bottom, and it's written in a different color. It has a different background. So what type of section is this? It is considered a what? Anyone want to raise their hand? Want to tell me? Zoe?
A sidebar?
Yes, this is a sidebar. And what do sidebars do? Tell us extra information that goes along with the story or the informational text, but it's a little bit off to the side. It's giving us extra information. So here is a lovely diagram, okay? You see 3 pictures. Based off of what we were just reading, what do we think that these pictures are of? John? The coral, correct. So when it reaches the ocean surface, a coral head stops growing upward because it doesn't want to grow out of the water, okay? So it grows instead only the sides, which are still underwater, continuing to grow outward in rings like the growth rings of a tree. You can tell how old the coral is by counting the rings. So you know how if you slice a tree open, they have all those tiny little rings and you can count them and that's how old the tree is. Very similar to that. Second picture. Between earthquakes, the ocean floor is slowly sinking, and the coral, which is attached to the ocean floor, is sinking too. The coral heads drop below the waterline, and sides grow up to the water's surface. And lastly, during an earthquake, part of the ocean floor springs up, and some coral heads are lifted half out of the water. The section of coral above the sea dies, while the part still underwater keeps growing. From above, the coral looks like a little donut inside a series of bigger ones. So that is just explaining more about how the coral grows outward and you can see rings instead of just growing up, because when it's out of the water, then it dies. So, interesting facts. So, why did Carrie Sy, the geologist, study the growth patterns of coral near the Sundance Megahertz Fault? Why is he doing that? Malik, what's up with the computer, sir? Why did he do that? Why is he studying these? Just for fun? He was like, oh my gosh, I want to study this fault line just for fun. Why is he studying this? Why, oh, why would someone study this? John.
Because he noticed that every 200 years an earthquake comes, so he wanted to study and see if there will be a new one.
Right, so he learned when past earthquakes are, and now he's trying to blank future. Do you need a charger? Because yours.
No, I'm letting you use mine.
Well, I don't need it that bad.
Yeah, you do.
Okay, thanks. And he's trying to blank future earthquakes. He's trying to blank them. What word am I saying? What word needs to go where the blank is? John? Which is what? If I think something's going to happen in the future, I'm blanking it. Predicting it, yeah. So the reason he's studying them is because he found a pattern of when they happened in the past, and now he wants to try to predict the next one. And why did Sy believe a giant undersea earthquake would take place in the early 2000s near Indonesia? Why did he decide this? Someone besides John. Why did he decide this, Phoebe? Because they're by a fault line, for sure. And then why else is it specific to this time period? Fault lines can always be dangerous, but why this time period? Because blank. It's okay. Isaiah, what do you think? Why is he saying this time period? He didn't just guess that it was going to happen in the 2000s. Why does he know one's going to happen in the 2000s? Or why is he predicting that? Claire, what do you think? Why does he know it's going to happen in the 2000s? Everyone should be looking in paragraph 8. Why does he know it's going to happen in the 2000s, Ethan?
Because it hits every 200 years. 200 years after 18 is 2000.
Right, perfect. So he knows, or he's predicting it's going to happen in the 2000s because he read the coral. He saw they happen every 200 years. Guess what? It's been about 200 years, which means one's going to happen most likely soon, right? You may turn the page. All right. So we just read a sidebar, and now we have another blank. Sinking islands. What is that? Someone remind me what that thing is called right there. Sinking islands. What is that called? They what, Alex? The word sinking islands. What is that? Dun dun. It's like just like rising corals. Malik. Subheading. This is so. What can we assume this section's gonna be about? Based off. Careful, Zoe.
Island.
Islands, right? And sinking means going down. So we can assume based off of this subheading, it's gonna be about sinking islands. All right. The corals weren't the only evidence of underground rumbling in Indonesia. The Sundan megathrust fault at the bottom of the Indian Ocean marks the collision between the two plates that make up the Earth's surface, one oceanic and the other continental. Between earthquakes, the plates are stuck together. As the oceanic plate slips slowly downward, it squeezes the continental plate sideways about a half an inch a year and drags it down a few inches a year as well. The islands on top of the continental plates are dragged down too, as much as half an inch a year. The more years between earthquakes, the more islands sink and the more stress builds up at the fault. So these plates hitting together cause the island to sink. So if there's two plates that are meeting, bloop, one is oceanic and one is continental. So the oceanic plate, what is above the oceanic plate? What do we think is above the oceanic plate, Abby? Oceanic. Yeah, the oceanic plate means there's ocean above it. There's water above it. And then continental plate sounds a lot like continent. And there are 7 continents in the world, but that's besides the point. So a continent, what's above a continental plate? If it's not ocean, it is land. So these two plates hitting together and it's bringing it down only like a half an inch a year. Okay, that's not very much. But over time, if it's been 200 years, that would be 100 inches down. So it's really hard to see. Just in a year, you wouldn't be able to tell an island moved a half an inch, but over time, you can see them moving. Abby, put that away. You don't need it. The islanders could tell the waterline was shifting. They can see their boardwalks and harbors sinking, Sai said. Trees that once grew tall on the shores are now underwater. And wells that once gave fresh water were full of salty seawater instead. But no one thought this had anything to do with earthquakes or tsunamis. So if you've been alive for 40 years and when you were a kid, there was a tree that, the whole thing was out of water, and now it's been 40 years, which means the island has gone down 20 inches at least, now there's some tree underwater. So people knew that over time, their island is going down because more things are underwater, but they didn't know it had anything to do because they were close to a fault line. They didn't know it had anything to do with earthquakes or tsunamis. They just knew, the island's going down a little bit. No super big reason for concern, the people of the island thought. Evidence from global positioning systems, or GPS, stations they'd set up to measure island sinking also had convinced the scientists that a big quake could rock the area at any time. As we came to realize what we were learning and how much risk people were, said Sai, we couldn't keep quiet. So, what does that mean? They found out all this information and they couldn't keep quiet. What does that mean they were doing? If they couldn't keep quiet, what does that probably mean, Gabby?
It means that they're going to tell the people on the island that there's an earthquake that's going to happen.
Right. They're going to tell everyone about the information. They don't just want to keep the information for themselves because remember, earthquakes and tsunamis can cause damage to properties and stuff, but also people. People could be harmed in it. So they can't keep quiet, meaning they can't keep the information to themselves. They need to tell people about it. In July 2004, Sai visited 5 islands and gave presentations at schools, churches, mosques, and village squares. So all of those are places where a lot of people would be. A mosque is another type of church. Sai and his colleagues plan to return the following year to visit more islands and teach more people about their research. Then, 6 months later, a quake struck. So, he was only able to visit 5 islands, which is a lot of islands, but he was never able to go back to tell more people about what was going to happen because it already happened. So was his prediction that an earthquake was coming correct?
Yeah.
Yes. So, that's crazy. His prediction was correct. And the earthquake, if it was July, which is the 7-month, the earthquake actually happened in December of 2004. Fun fact, in case you wanted to know that. And here's just a picture of a geographer who's preparing a GPS station in Indonesia to collect data. So a person cannot stare at an island, even if they stared at an island for a year straight, they would not be able to tell that it's sunk. But a machine can measure it daily and see when it's sinking. So that's why we use technology like GPS. So now this is, once again, a different color. So this, on the next page, would be considered a what? It's a different color than the rest of the story. John?
Sidebar.
Sidebar. This sidebar happens to be the entire length of the page, but that's besides the point. And it is what makes earthquake. So, what is this sidebar going to be about, my lovely, lovely friends? What is this sidebar going to be about? Gabby?
About what makes the earthquake.
Yeah, in your own words. Because that's exactly what the title is. In your own words, what's this sidebar going to be about? Rush. What makes the earthquake? So what might that sidebar be about? Okay, so it says, what makes the earthquake? So we're about to read probably what? Probably what are we going to read, Ethan?
How they are going to happen.
What are they?
The earthquake.
Yeah, how earthquakes happen. That's literally what we're going to read about. It literally says what makes the earthquake. So what are we going to read about? How earthquakes happen, okay? So, next time you're outside, jump up and down. Stomp your feet. Stomp your feet a few times. The ground seems solid, right? Well, not entirely. If we jumped up and down right now, we're not going to, but if we did, would we feel the ground moving? No, we would just be jumping on ground. The part of the earth you're standing on, called the litmosphere, is rock solid. But the litmosphere is very thin. If the earth was the size of an apple, the litmosphere would be just about as thick as the apple skin. Is apple peel? Skin. I don't like that word. Apple skin. Gross. The apple peel is very thick.
Yes. No.
No, we can bite right through an apple peel, right? It's easy. So, even though it's rock solid, the litmosphere, if we compared that using the simile in apple, it would not be very thick, okay? So, even though it is thick, and based off of how big the world is, it's really not that thick. If you dug a hole through the earth, you'd find that the deeper you went, what's inside becomes hotter and more gooey. Gross. The solid litmosphere is broken up into close-fitting plates that drift on top of molten rock underneath. We don't feel the plates moving because they're usually drifting only a few centimeters a year, about as fast or slow as your fingernails grow. So even though underneath us and underneath the litmosphere, molten rock, like lava at the core of the earth, and then the plates are on top of it. They move so little in a year. They move so this This knuckle on your pointer finger is an inch. This knuckle right here. So they move less than that a year. So we can't feel them moving because they move so slowly and so little. So even though they're moving, we don't realize they're moving. That's why when we jump, when we walk, when we stomp our feet, anything like that, we don't feel the earth moving because it's doing it so smallly. Earth's plates don't move all parallel to each other and in the same directions. Parallel means what? If everything moved parallel, that means they would never touch. They would never meet. They would never intersect. But we know they do intersect. They intersect at fault lines, meaning they touch, they bump into each other, and that is what causes earthquakes. At the boundary where two plates meet, called a fault, they bump and push into each other. They're wedged together most of the time, but stress builds up as plates bump and grind together. Finally, the plates break free along a section of the fault, releasing pent-up energy in an earthquake. The force makes the objects move up and down in a lateral motion, and this causes great destruction. So if all the plates were parallel to each other, we wouldn't have to have an earthquake. They would just all be right next to each other, totally fine. But since they don't move parallel, since they do bump into each other, eventually they release, whoosh, cause an earthquake. The earth shakes, lateral movement, side to side. And we know earthquakes can cause major destruction depending on where they are. There are several different types of faults. The Sundance Fault offshore from the Batu and Metawani Islands is called a megathrust, where an underwater oceanic plate dives under a continental plate. So sometimes there are plates that are both continental. They both have land above them. The one that's a megathrust that we're talking about is specific because it is an oceanic and a continental, meaning ocean and land one hitting together. So there's just different types of plates. Who knew? So what does, in our sidebar, what does the author compare Earth to? Ethan? An apple. He said, if you remember, the Earth were the size of the apple, and litmus sphere would be like the skin of the apple. So the litmus sphere is not as thick as we necessarily think. And he also compares plates moving so slow, he compares them to what? Earth's plates move so slow, or about as what? Bree, what does he compare the plates moving to? Everyone should be looking right now in case you're called on next. What does the author compare how slowly Earth's plates move? He compares them to something, uses a simile. Compares them to what? Dun, 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 dun. Malik?
As well as fingernails.
Right, so that's how slow they grow. Like, if you stared at your nails today, would you be able to see them growing? No. Lots of times we don't even realize our nails are growing because they grow so extremely slow. You cannot physically see them grow. They just one day are longer than they were the next. What? Sure. So that's what he compares it to. And I also think the author uses some good adjectives, or what's another word for adjective? It's a what? A descriptive word. When he's describing how the plates move, he says they bump together, they push, they grind, they break free. All of those are good adjectives. He could just say they hit, but he used some extra words to explain it even better. All right. So once again, was size prediction correct? Yes. Did he know that it was going to happen that soon, though? No. How many islands was he able to warn? 5. This is totally non-specific, and I don't even think we found the answer to this. Or I don't even think we hear the answer to this necessarily. Do you think everyone he came across believed him? No, there are probably people that he met along the way and was like, you're crazy. We're not going to have an earthquake. Because if the last earthquake was in 1883, no, in 1833, anyone alive that he talked to, were they alive during the last earthquake? No, of course not. That means they'd be 200 years old almost. Obviously, no one is that old. So he probably ran into people that didn't necessarily believe him. And then he probably also ran into lots of people that did believe him. And it is kind of hard to, I think personally, this is just personal. I think it'd be hard to tell people something if they didn't believe you, right? Like if people were doubting you. So even though he was probably being doubted, he still did his personal best to warn as many people as possible. So turn the page. Now it says December 26, 2004. This is another what? That is a blank, John. Another subheading. All right. The ground shook so violently that people were knocked off their feet. Dishes fell from shelves. Roofs collapsed. Trees toppled. All right. Imagine you're hanging out, walking down, fell over, earthquake. Imagine in your cabinets at home, dishes fall on the ground. If roofs collapsed, what does that mean? What does that word collapsed mean? Alex? Right, they caved in, they collapsed, they went down. And then if trees toppled, what does that mean? If a tree toppled, what does that mean? Eliana? Yeah, fall down. Perfect. So the author used, once again, good descriptive words. It didn't just say trees fell down. It's they toppled. So the author's trying to use good adjectives here. 2 minutes after it began, the shaking stopped. It had been the biggest earthquake anywhere on the planet in 40 years. That's a really big earthquake. But it lasted for 2 minutes. And 2 minutes doesn't seem like a long time, but 2 minutes of everything in your house breaking would probably be a really long time. Like a twig, you bend and bend until it breaks. Like a twig, you bend and bend until it breaks. Pressure that had been building along the sun-done mega-thrust fault for hundreds of years had finally given way. Along a section of a fault longer than the state of California, the oceanic and continental plates suddenly violently separated, which triggered earth-shaking waves. But the worst was still to come. Okay, so the state of California, I think, is the third biggest state. And it's definitely the longest state. But area-wise, I think it's third behind Alaska and Texas. But it is definitely the longest state.
I thought Kentucky was.
No. Let's look up how long California is. No, Kentucky is not even close.
No. Texas is.
I just said that.
She said Texas.
Cali.
Takes a light.
Okay, so California is 770 miles long from like tip to end. So that means on this thrust line, over 770 miles is quaking. Okay, so the earthquake is widespread. It's over 770 miles. So like 800 miles long is this earthquake. And the plates meeting triggered an earthquake, meaning it blanked the earthquake. Triggered is one of our vocab words. Triggered means what? It blanked an earthquake. Isabel.
Yeah.
I just asked a question. The plates meeting triggered an earthquake. What does that mean? If it triggered the earthquake, it... No. You cannot cause a fault. The fault is where their plates are already meeting. The plates hit each other. It triggered an earthquake. What does our vocab word triggered mean? Everyone. Started. Remember, if something triggered something, it caused something to happen. It started something. So these plates meeting triggered an earthquake. So 6 months after he was telling people about it is when it happened. We are going to continue on to paragraphs, the next page, and then we're going to come back to Okay, we're going to read No Ordinary Waves. No Ordinary Waves is off to the bottom, and it is not part of the original story. It's off to the bottom. It's a different color, which means it's what, Rush? We've had 2 other of these so far today. What are you looking for, child? It died? So what are you looking for? Oh, the book? Here, use Zoe's. But it's in the cabinet. Just plug it in and grab a book. We're on page 210. Hey, Rush, we really need to be paying attention, sir. Okay? Raise your hand if you know what this is called. It's down to the bottom. It's giving us extra information. What's that called, friends? I want to see your hand up if you remember what that's called. Alicia, do you know? What? No. Subheading would be December 26, 2004. Friends, if we don't know what this thing is, we should be paying attention because this is the 3rd one we're coming across. Bree. Sidebar. It's giving us extra information about no ordinary waves. So, most waves are formed by wind that blows across the ocean surface, pulling water with it. But a tsunami is started by a disturbance such as undersea earthquakes that shift water at the ocean floor. So normally waves, just like in water, if like this water right here in this jug, I know it's hard to see, or in my fish tank is perfectly still, okay? There's no waves in this jug or in this fish tank because there's no wind. If I started blowing on the fish tank, there would be tiny baby waves because I would be creating wind. So waves are created by wind, except tsunami is created by something different, like, for example, underwater earthquake. Water is thrust up from the bottom of the sea all the way to the ocean surface, and waves begin to radiate out in all directions. As the tsunami waves hits the shallow water near land, it slows down but grows taller. Water at the shore is sucked into a giant wave, exposing fish, shells, and corals that were underwater moments ago. Then suddenly, a towering wall of water crashes onto the beach. So it literally like, oh, hey, Ethan, I don't know what you're doing, but you're bothering me. So, tsunami, it's grabbing all the water like a giant straw, sucking all the water in, and then it's blowing it out. So literally like it's taking the water away, literally showing the bottom of the ocean and then pushing it onto land. Tsunamis can be super dangerous. Luckily, we don't get tsunamis. All right, we are almost out of time. So, Eric, feel free to listen to this. We are going to stop reading here today, but in just a second, I'm going to give you a note card. And on that note card, you are going to write me 3 things that you learned today. Anything you learned today. And you are free to use the book to help you remember. Eric, obviously you can't get a note card, so please email me 3 things you learned today from our story. I don't care what they're about. Any 3 things. They can be about informational text. They can be about the story itself. They can be about how the thing was set up. Anything. Yes. Yes. Alex is going to pass you out a note card. Put your name on it. Write me 3 things. When you are done with those 3 things, I need it in the tray, and then you may silently read until we have to head to STEM. So, Eric, you're going to email me because obviously you don't have a note card. Tomorrow, we will finish reading this. All right?
Okay. Bye, Michelle.
See you later.
Out.